Welcome to the Lost Archives. Quiet stories from forgotten history. Each night, we open a single file from the past. A vanished city, a misplaced discovery, a life almost erased from record. There is no spectacle here, no urgency, only the patient unfolding of what once was. And together, we'll turn the page. Alexandria's royal quarter ran along the harbour, where the sea wind carried the smell of salt and cedar and ship rope. At its centre was a building unlike anything the ancient world had constructed before. Not a temple, not a palace, but a building they called the Library of Alexandria, built to hold every book that had ever been written. The walls were lined with wooden shelving called theke, pigeonholes stacked from floor to ceiling, each holding a papyrus roll. From the end of each roll hung a small tag with the title and author's name. Without those tags, nothing in hundreds of thousands of scrolls could be found. A scroll stretched between 4 and 9 meters when fully unrolled, and reading it required both hands, one to hold the rolled portion, one to advance the next section. You could not take notes while reading. Ancient sources disagreed sharply on the total count. Estimates range from 40,000 scrolls to 700,000, depending on which writer you trust. No one alive today can verify any figure. To organize the collection, the scholar Callimachus compiled the Pinakes, a bibliographic catalogue that ran to 120 volumes, 5 times the length of Homer's Iliad. Every author's name, birthplace, and known works arranged alphabetically by genre. Every merchant vessel entering Alexandria's harbour was subject to search, and any book found was brought to the library. The original confiscated, a fresh copy made to return to the owner. Those scrolls were catalogued with a specific notation, from the ships. Ptolemy III borrowed the original state archive manuscripts of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides from Athens, posting 15 talents of silver as a deposit guarantee. He had copies made, returned the copies, kept the originals, and forfeited the deposit. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth by comparing 2 measurements: a vertical rod in Alexandria, casting a shadow equal to 1/50th of a full circle, and a well in Syene, 5,000 stadia south, where sunlight fell straight down with no shadow at all. His result, 252,000 stadia, is within 1% of the actual figure. Hero of Alexandria mounted a hollow bronze sphere on tubes above a boiling vessel. Steam entered the sphere and escaped through 2 bent nozzles, spinning it. He documented it in a work called Pneumatica and classified it as a curiosity, not a machine worth developing. What the library held in its first 2 centuries was, by any measure, a concentration of human knowledge without parallel in the ancient world. The question historians have argued over since antiquity is not what it held, it is what happened to it, and whether anyone noticed when it was finally gone. Alexander chose the location for Alexandria in 331 BCE for its harbour. 2 natural bays sheltered by the island of Pharos, connected to the mainland by a causeway nearly a mile long. The site gave the city simultaneous access to Mediterranean sea routes and the Nile's interior waterways, which is why it became the wealthiest port in the ancient world. After Alexander's death, Egypt passed to his general Ptolemy I, who around 295 BCE entrusted a former Athenian statesman named Demetrius of Phaleron with founding an institution that would gather every text in the known world. Demetrius was a student of Aristotle's school, who had maintained his own substantial private library during years of political exile. He understood what a serious collection required to function. The library was not built as a standalone archive. It was attached to the Mouseion, a research institution modelled on Aristotle's Lyceum in Athens, with covered colonnades, lecture halls, shared dining rooms, and gardens. All of it sat inside the restricted royal quarter of the palace complex, accessible only to scholars the king had personally appointed. Scholars of the Mouseion received a royal stipend, housing, food, and a salary from the Ptolemaic treasury, with no other obligations required of them. The philosopher Timon of Phlius called them fed birds in a cage, kept comfortable so they would produce, and accurate in every particular. The first head of the library, Zenodotus of Ephesus, spent his tenure comparing every manuscript of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey against the others. He introduced the obolos, a horizontal mark placed beside any line he believed was added by a later hand, not written by Homer himself. Homer's Iliad required 24 papyrus rolls. Aristotle's collected works required approximately 150. The scroll format shaped how knowledge was organized. A complete author occupied a dedicated section of shelving, catalogued by roll count and sequence. Apollonius of Rhodes composed the Argonautica, his epic poem of Jason and the Argonauts, while serving as head of the library. His dispute with the scholar Callimachus over literary form grew bitter enough that Apollonius eventually left Alexandria for Rhodes entirely. Around 270 BCE, Aristarchus of Samos proposed that the earth revolved around the sun, and correctly reasoned that the stars must lie at extraordinary distances, which is why no shift in their apparent positions was observable from Earth. His model was rejected. The geocentric model prevailed for the next 1800 years. Hipparchus of Nicaea compiled the Western world's first star catalogue around 150 BCE. Coordinates for at least 850 stars, accurate to within approximately 1 degree. The catalogue was lost for 19 centuries until 2022, when scholars using multispectral imaging at St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai found its coordinates written beneath later text in a parchment codex. When the rival library at Pergamon grew to 200,000 scrolls, the Ptolemies cut off papyrus exports to starve it. Pergamon's answer was parchment, writing material made from stretched, dried calfskin named for the city, and far more durable than papyrus in wet climates. Around 270 BCE, Ptolemy II commissioned 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes, to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The resulting text, called the Septuagint, became the version of the Old Testament most early Christians read for the following 5 centuries. A trained scribe could transcribe roughly 250 to 300 lines per day. An average historical work took 2 weeks to copy. The finished scrolls sold for about 8 denarii, equivalent to 2 days' wages for a common laborer. In 145 BCE, Ptolemy VIII expelled all foreign scholars from Alexandria in retaliation for their political opposition. The intellectual community scattered to Athens, Rhodes, and Antioch, and the concentrated network that had made the library what it was never fully reassembled. Without regular recopying, a papyrus scroll deteriorated beyond legibility within 100 to 200 years. Maintaining 400,000 scrolls required constant copying, staffing, and funding. And when any one of those three faltered, the books didn't burn. They crumbled. A secondary collection, the Daughter Library, was housed within the Serapeum Temple complex on Alexandria's southwestern hill, holding between 42,800 and 90,000 scrolls. It served as public overflow, while the main library remained inside the restricted royal quarter, accessible only by royal appointment. At its peak, Alexandria held between 500,000 and 1 million inhabitants, larger than any city in the Mediterranean world except Rome. Its harbour controlled the flow of Egyptian grain to Rome, and the library gave the city its claim to something Rome never quite matched: intellectual authority. Scrolls in the library were not available for borrowing. Scholars came to the building to read on site, and handling originals was regulated. The texts were state property, subject to the same legal protections as the Ptolemaic royal treasury. Mark Antony gave Cleopatra approximately 200,000 scrolls taken from the rival Library of Pergamon as a gift. The entire collected holdings of a rival institution transferred in one shipment. Whether the full shipment arrived before Octavian defeated Antony in 30 BCE remains disputed. Eratosthenes served as chief librarian from approximately 245 to 195 BCE, and used the library's resources to produce the Geographica, the first systematic geography of the known world. He mapped coastlines from Britain to India and introduced latitude and longitude lines as a coordinate grid, a system still used in navigation today. Euclid's Elements, 13 books systematizing the whole of geometry, was composed in Alexandria during this period. Archimedes studied there before returning to Syracuse and corresponded with library scholars throughout his career. A density of cross-disciplinary work not matched in Western history for another 17 centuries. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar found himself outnumbered in Alexandria's harbour, caught between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII, both claiming the Egyptian throne. His soldiers set fire to the Egyptian warships moored at the docks to prevent an encircling attack from the sea. Fire spread from the ships to the warehouses along the waterfront, and ancient sources, Cassius Dio and Plutarch among them, record books stored near the harbour being destroyed. Modern historians conclude that perhaps 40,000 scrolls awaiting export were lost, not the main library building itself. Around 20 BCE, nearly 3 decades after Caesar's fire, the geographer Strabo visited Alexandria and described the Museion as fully active: scholars in residence, the dining hall in use, academic work ongoing. Whatever the fire had damaged, the library had survived. When Octavian entered Alexandria in 30 BCE, Egypt became a Roman province, and the Ptolemaic royal family, the library's patrons for 2.5 centuries, was finished. The Roman emperors who followed had no personal stake in an institution they had not built, and their support was inconsistent from the start. The Ptolemies had paid 15 talents of silver to deprive Athens of original manuscripts. Roman emperors occasionally donated funds but showed no comparable hunger for acquisition. And without that pressure, deteriorating scrolls went unreplaced. Staff positions were left unfilled, and scholars increasingly sought patronage elsewhere. Emperor Claudius added a new wing to the Museion and commissioned scholars to expand the collection, one of the last documented acts of Roman imperial investment in the library. His contemporaries considered him eccentric for caring so much about books. During the Kitos War from 115 to 117 CE, fighting in Alexandria destroyed the Jewish quarter, and Roman retaliation killed tens of thousands across Egypt. The prolonged civic violence disrupted the networks of patronage and academic exchange that still kept cultural institutions functioning. Emperor Caracalla arrived in Alexandria in 215 CE, after the city's population had been circulating jokes at his expense, and ordered his soldiers into the civilian quarters. Ancient sources record thousands killed. One specifies 20,000, and Alexandria's intellectual life went largely silent in the years that followed. Marcus Aurelius suspended the revenues of the Museion and expelled all foreign scholars, breaking the continuous scholarly residency that had defined the institution for more than 350 years. Some scholars were later readmitted, but the interruption was permanent in its effect on the institution's cohesion. In 272 CE, Emperor Aurelian retook Alexandria from the Palmyrene queen Zenobia and destroyed the Brucheion, the royal quarter where the library had stood for 5 centuries. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing a century later, referred to the main library in the past tense. After 272 CE, scholars writing about Alexandria's cultural institutions no longer mentioned the main library. The daughter library at the Serapeum was still referenced, but the building that had housed the original collection left no trace in the surviving record after Aurelian's destruction. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius issued edicts requiring the demolition of pagan temples across the Roman Empire. In Alexandria, the largest surviving pagan structure was the Serapeum, which also housed the daughter library. Bishop Theophilus led the crowd to the Serapeum in person and struck the first blow against the cult statue of Serapis. A church was built over the site. The daughter library, whatever remained of its scrolls, was destroyed in the process. Following the Serapeum's destruction, the philosophers who had maintained schools in Alexandria began to leave. Synesius of Cyrene, writing from the city through the 390s, described its intellectual life as profoundly diminished. Hypatia, daughter of the mathematician Theon of Alexandria, led the Neoplatonist philosophical school in the city through the turn of the 5th century. She lectured on mathematics and astronomy, wrote commentaries on Diophantus and Apollonius of Perga, and counted both pagans and Christians among her students. In March 415 CE, a mob led by a church lector named Peter seized Hypatia as she traveled through the city. They dragged her to the Caesareum church, stripped her, and killed her with pottery shards. Her body was burned. No one was prosecuted. Within a generation of Hypatia's death, the Neoplatonist school relocated permanently to Athens. Scholars who might have continued teaching and copying in Alexandria instead found patronage in Constantinople, Antioch, and the Persian court. By the mid-5th century, no scholar of record in Alexandria maintained access to a significant manuscript collection. Travelers passing through described the harbour, the grain commerce, and the churches. None mentioned libraries. In 529 CE, Emperor Justinian ordered the closure of the Platonic Academy in Athens, an institution that had operated continuously for 9 centuries. Its scholars relocated to Persia at the invitation of Khosrow I, carrying their manuscripts east across the border. Sasanian Persian forces under General Shahrbaraz captured Alexandria in 619 CE after a prolonged siege, holding it for a decade before Byzantine forces under Emperor Heraclius retook the city in 629 CE. No source from either side of the conflict records any library of significance present in the city during this period. The Arab general Amr ibn al-As took Alexandria in 642 CE after a 14-month siege, under surrender terms that protected the lives and property of its inhabitants. No contemporary Arab, Byzantine or Coptic source describes a library, major or minor, being present in the city at the time of the handover. A famous story holds that Caliph Omar ordered Alexandria's library burned, saying, "If these books agree with the Quran, they are superfluous. If they disagree, they are pernicious. Burn them." The story first appears in writing 6 centuries after the supposed event. Its central witness died in 570 CE, 72 years before the Arab conquest. Modern historians regard the Omar story as a polemical invention composed during the Crusade era. By the time it first appeared in writing, no institution anyone could have burned had existed in Alexandria for at least 8 centuries. Under Arab rule, Alexandria remained a significant port, its harbour and grain trade intact. Scholars interested in Greek philosophy were by this point working primarily in Persia and Syria, translating Aristotle, Galen and Euclid into Arabic in preparation for the great translation movement of the Abbasid period. The story of the library is commonly told as a story of fire. But a papyrus scroll left unrecopied for 200 years crumbles to dust without any flame at all. And the library's deeper destruction was a gradual withdrawal of money, of scholars, and of the institutional practice of copying what was deteriorating before it was lost. The Museon's dining hall, where scholars had eaten together under royal patronage for 3 centuries, appears in no source after the 3rd century CE. There was no closing ceremony. The position of head librarian simply stops appearing in the historical record. The damage came in stages across 7 centuries. Dock warehouses lost in 48 BCE, foreign scholars expelled in 145 BCE, royal funding suspended around 175 CE, the royal quarter destroyed in 272 CE, the daughter library burned in 391 CE. Not one blow, 6, spread across 700 years. Sophocles wrote approximately 123 plays during his lifetime. 7 survive, not because the other 116 were destroyed, but because once the institutions that preserved them declined, scribes only copied what teachers actively used in classrooms. Aristotle's Poetics survives as an incomplete text, and within it, Aristotle himself refers to a second book he planned, on comedy. No writer after antiquity ever cited it. It may have been lost within a century of being written. Aristarchus proposed a heliocentric universe around 250 BCE. Copernicus published the same model in 1543 CE, 1800 years later. Copernicus had read a reference to Aristarchus in Archimedes' Sand Reckoner, one of the few texts that survived. What else Aristarchus wrote did not. In 2022, scholars using multispectral imaging at St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai found stellar coordinates written beneath later text in a 10th century parchment codex. They matched the description of Hipparchus's lost star catalogue, the most accurate ancient star survey ever compiled, invisible for 19 centuries. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded under Caliph al-Ma'mun around 830 CE, sponsored the systematic translation of Greek scientific and philosophical works into Arabic. Aristotle, Euclid, Galen, Ptolemy. Several Greek texts survive today only because of those translations. Byzantine monasteries preserved a different category, primarily literary and historical texts, not scientific. What neither Arabic translators nor Byzantine monks chose to copy simply did not survive. When construction began on the Bibliotheca Alexandrina in the 1990s, Archaeologists found Ptolemaic masonry, lecture room floors, and papyrus fragments on the site, but no archive. The modern library opened in 2002 at a cost of $220 million. It holds space for 8 million books. The library was never a building. It was a system. Royal money, trained scholars, scribes, acquisition agents, and the practiced discipline of recopying scrolls before they became illegible. When the money stopped and the scholars dispersed, the building became a storage room, and storage rooms eventually become ruins. Scholars estimate that roughly 700,000 Greek texts existed in the ancient world at their peak circulation. Fewer than 1% survive today, including everything preserved through Arabic translation, Byzantine manuscript programs, and chance discoveries in monastery palimpsests. What was lost at Alexandria was not burned. It was forgotten, progressively, incrementally, over 7 centuries, as the people and institutions responsible for the practice of memory chose other priorities. The scrolls survived exactly as long as someone paid someone else to copy them. Alexandria still sits at the edge of the Nile Delta, where Alexander placed it. The sea is still there. The harbour is still there. What is gone is not the city, not the shore, not the light. It is the particular arrangement of people and intention that once gathered there to write things down, and to keep writing them down, so they would not be forgotten.